Today on Wanja's Health Diary, we have Soli Kiluta, who is a grief recovery specialist, who's going to take us through the process of grief. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
What is the grief recovery?
The grief recovery method is a method that was developed by the Grief Recovery Institute to help people move beyond the loss of a loved one or divorce or any kind of loss they might have gone through in their lives.
In terms of grief, they say that time heals. Does it?
There is the myth that time heals, but it is our experience that in order to get beyond grief, past grief, you have to take certain actions.
Okay.
Yeah? And the sooner you start taking those actions, the sooner you can start getting past the grief.
Okay.
If you don't take those actions, you can grieve for years.
What are some of these actions that we're talking about?
We usually first start by identifying the different areas that might have caused grief in your life.
Okay.
Because what happens with grief is that grief is cumulative. Yeah? If you don't process the grief, it just keeps building and piling. And over time, what happens is there's what we call the short-term energy relieving behaviors. When the grief builds up to a certain point, people start looking for ways to relieve the pressure. And this can manifest in behaviors like eating or sleeping or alcoholism,
Okay.
or different kinds of vices. You can also become a workaholic as a way to cope. Yeah? So we try to look for the root cause, which is the grief, and address that.
Okay.
And because of its cumulative nature, what happens when you grieve is that there are some effects, yeah, like memory loss and things like fatigue, loss of energy. These are also effects of cumulative grief.
Okay. And in terms of how one person then grieves, I'm sure it's different, to that of the other person. Do we have, culture associations that you take into consideration when you're taking somebody through grief recovery?
People react differently and they grieve differently. But the sooner you start confronting your grief and processing it,
okay,
the sooner you will heal. And you've had, we always talk about the stages of grief.
Which are?
There's denial, is usually the first stage. And then I think there's bargaining, acceptance.
And is there an instance where you would say, an aspect of delayed grief, where probably someone has lost something or somebody, and it doesn't affect them immediately, yet it probably takes another 5-10 years, before then the grief starts manifesting?
There is what we call complicated grief.
Yeah.
And this is grief that somebody has been grieving for a very long time, but they've never confronted it. So it's just been in the background. And what happens if it's not addressed, it can be triggered by something. For instance, you've seen during a funeral, and when they're about to lay the body to rest, somebody just breaks out and starts screaming and wailing, and they're probably not the ones who've been bereaved. Yeah? So it's probably they've had some grief that they never confronted, and when they went to this funeral, it just triggered that grief.
Okay.
So it's always good to start addressing the grief.
Okay. And in terms of how you deal with grief when it comes with children, is it accommodative, and are children given a platform where they're able to express their grief?
There is a book by the Grief Recovery Institute called When Children Grieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, children grieve differently, but they do grieve. And it's one of the areas that's not very well understood. You know, children have the same emotions that human beings, grown-ups have, but they are limited in that sometimes they are not able to express it very well. So you have to understand, you have to bring yourself down to their level and understand.
Yeah.
There are some do's and don'ts. For instance, I'll give you an example. When children are grieving, when somebody say they lose someone, we tend not to tell them the truth.
Yes.
So it's important that you tell children the truth. You know, you tell them that this person died. Yeah.
And how do you deal with the questions? You know, what is death? Why can't I talk to them? You know, will I see them tomorrow? How do you deal with those kinds of questions?
So you just be honest, try and explain it to them.
Okay.
Yeah. What you should not do, for instance, I see a lot of people tell children that, oh, so and so has gone to be with the Lord. You know, God loved him, so he took him.
Shouldn't we take that religious angle?
What the child understands is that God takes the ones he loves. So this child will grow up having issues with God, yeah, or on the long term. So they'll probably be scared of God. You know? So he's the one who
took away their dad, took
yes,
away their mom,
he takes away,
or their favorite auntie,
yes,
or probably grandpa,
yes,
grandma.
And then now addressing that will be another process.
So which is the right way? How do you explain?
Just tell them the truth. So and so died.
Then what next?
Human beings die. It's a normal part of life. Yeah, we are not here forever. Yeah? So sometimes we die. It could be out of natural causes, or it could be an illness, or an accident. Just tell them the truth.
Yeah.
Children understand more than we give them credit for.